It was the summer of 1998 when the world around the Keller family shifted forever. 7-year-old Hannah Keller vanished from the heart of their home, the living room, while cartoons played cheerfully on the television. The sun streamed through the curtains, casting harmless shapes across the carpet, and the air smelled faintly of buttered toast from breakfast. There was no shattered glass, no overturned furniture, not even the faintest scuff mark to suggest a struggle. She was there one moment, her little body curled into the corner of the couch, and gone the next. The only thing missing along with her was her most cherished possession, a threadbare teddy bear. Everyone assumed she had carried it with her when she disappeared. No one imagined it could be the key to the truth. 16 years passed. The seasons came and went, and the weight of her absence settled into the family like an immovable stone. In late March, Hannah's older brother Ethan, now a man in his mid-20s, took on a job for quick cash. It was simple work: help clear out the belongings of their late neighbor, Dale Whitmore. Dale had died quietly in his sleep when his heart gave out, leaving no children, no wife, and only a distant brother named Alan, who didn't bother attending the funeral or even collecting the keys to the house. Ethan wasn't sentimental about Dale. To him, the old man was a background fixture of childhood, the neighbor who waved from his porch and offered unwanted stories about fixing fences or how the neighborhood used to be. $50 was $50, and all he had to do was drag Dale's worn-out furniture to the curb, stack boxes for goodwill, and sweep away the lingering odor of stale cigarettes and cat urine that had seeped deep into the carpets decades earlier. Dale's house stood just 3 doors down from Ethan's mother's place. The cracked sidewalk leading there was the same one Ethan and Hannah had raced down countless times, their knees scraped from tumbles, their laughter echoing on humid summer evenings. Working in that house brought all those echoes back, though he tried not to think about it. Room by room, he cleared away Dale's life. The last space left was the bedroom. Stepping inside felt strangely invasive. The blinds were half drawn, muting the daylight into a dull yellow haze. The air was thick with the scent of dust and something faintly medicinal. In the dresser drawers, Ethan found neatly folded flannel shirts, spare hearing aid batteries, and the orange prescription bottles that clearly hadn't been enough to save him. The bed, an aging queen frame with a sagging mattress, seemed to hold its own stale warmth, like it still remembered the man who had slept there. Ethan flipped the mattress aside, shoved at a pair of slippers that reeked of mothballs and old sweat. That's when he noticed something. A shoebox shoved deep beneath the bed frame. It was positioned so far back he had to get down on his stomach, stretching an arm into the shadow to drag it out. Dust clung to his sleeve. He pulled the box into the light. Sitting cross-legged on the worn carpet, he removed the brittle rubber band holding the lid shut. It snapped into powder between his fingers. Inside were time-worn scraps of Dale's life, receipts curled from age, random letters in shaky handwriting, and several Polaroid photographs. At the very bottom lay a matted lump of gray fur. Ethan's breath caught. He knew that shape instantly. It was a cheap teddy bear, one ear hanging limply where the seam had torn open, its once soft fur worn to patches. On the right paw, faded but still visible, was a swirl of pink embroidery thread spelling out, Hannah. He remembered the night their mother had stitched her daughter's name there after Dale gifted the bear to Hannah for her 7th birthday. The idea was to keep it from getting lost at school or in the park. Ethan held the bear gingerly, brushing dust from its clumped fur, and the weight of memory hit him like a punch. He saw Hannah in their living room, cross-legged on the floor with the bear tucked under her chin, eyes glued to Saturday morning cartoons. He heard her giggle as Dale handed her the gift, wrapped in thin, cheerful paper. He could almost smell the vanilla frosting their mother was spreading onto her birthday cake in the kitchen. In the corner of his memory, Alan was there too, grinning like an uncle who had known her forever. Without thinking, Ethan squeezed the bear's belly. Something shifted inside. Not the yielding give of stuffing, but a dull, solid click. His brow furrowed. He squeezed again. Definitely something hidden deep within. Heart pounding, he dug a thumb into the back seam, feeling the old stitches give way. Using his car keys, he widened the hole until something small fell into his palm. A microcassette recorder, cheap and dinged up, with duct tape covering one side. For a long moment, Ethan simply stared at it. 16 years. The recorder felt heavier than it should have, as if it carried the weight of everything lost. A part of him wanted to shove it back into the bear, return both to the box, and bury the entire thing where he'd found it. But then he pictured Hannah again, the way her tiny fingers had traced the stitched letters of her name, the way she'd pull the bear close when she drifted to sleep. She'd been 7, he'd been 9. He'd promised their mother he would keep an eye on her that afternoon while she paid the bills. He remembered turning away for just a moment, distracted by cartoons and a bowl of cereal. When he looked back, the couch was empty. The bear was gone. So was Hannah. There had been no signs of a break-in, no scuffle, no footprints in the soft dirt outside. Only the screen door swaying open in the warm summer air. Now, holding the lifeless recorder, Ethan felt a deep unease coil in his stomach. Why had Dale, the seemingly harmless neighbor with his easy smile, kept Hannah's bear hidden under his bed for all these years? Why conceal something so deeply tied to the day she disappeared? He stood too quickly, and the shoebox tumbled to the floor. Polaroids spilled out, scattering across the carpet. He caught glimpses of Dale beside a battered pickup truck, a faded shot of backyard cookouts, and another of Alan, leaning on a porch railing with a cigarette between his fingers. Ethan scooped the bear under his arm and slipped the recorder into his coat pocket. His heart thudded in his ears, the sour taste of panic rising in his throat. The same panic he thought he'd left behind long ago. From the living room, the landlord called out, asking if he was finished. Ethan didn't answer. He stepped over the scattered photographs, one boot pinning a picture of Alan's crooked grin to the carpet. He closed the bedroom door behind him, holding the bear tight against his chest. He didn't know what was on the tape. He didn't know why Dale had kept it or what it might reveal. But one truth was certain. Whatever secrets that bear had carried for 16 years belonged to Hannah. And this time, Ethan wasn't going to turn away. Ethan parked 2 blocks away from the house, engine off, headlights fading into the dark. The street was silent except for the occasional hum of a passing car, and he sat there motionless, the teddy bear in his lap. The weight of it pressed into his knees, and for a moment, he caught himself staring into its stitched face, like he was waiting for it to blink, to speak, to whisper the answers he had chased for 16 years. He couldn't take it inside. Not yet. Not like this. His mother had mastered the art of pretending. She had spent years packing her grief into neat, invisible boxes, hiding them behind grocery lists, pharmacy bags, and polite, brittle smiles. She told him more than once, in that soft, trembling way, 16 years, Ethan. Hannah's gone. Let it be, please. She'd said it like she was asking him to spare them both the pain. But here he was, holding the very bear that should have disappeared with his sister. And it felt heavier than any stuffed toy should, as if it carried the knowledge of everything it had stolen from them. The microcassette in his coat pocket rattled softly when he shifted. Ethan pulled it out under the dome light, and its dull plastic glinted faintly. Cheap, battered, caked with grime in the creases. He popped the battery hatch open with his thumbnail. Empty, of course. He searched the cab of his truck, rooting through the glove compartment and under the seats. He found old gas receipts, dust-coated napkins, and a fossilized pack of gum so hard it could have chipped teeth. But no batteries. Frustration built in his chest, sharp and hot. He slammed the glove box shut so hard the bear slid from the seat and nearly hit the floor. He caught it by the paw, thumb brushing the faded pink embroidery of his sister's name. It was as clear as if it had been stitched yesterday. The only place open this late was the all-night gas station on the corner, the one where he and Hannah used to slip candy into their pockets when they were kids. giggling as they ran out into the summer air. He drove there without thinking, the streets deserted and slick under the street lamps. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, bathing the aisles in cold, colorless light. The clerk barely glanced at him when Ethan dropped a pack of AA batteries onto the counter. No small talk, no explanation. He pushed a crumpled bill across the sticky plastic counter and stepped back out into the night. Back in the truck, he tore the package open with his teeth, hands trembling as he shoved the batteries into place. Wrong the first time, curse spilling from his lips. Right the second. The lid snapped shut. He sat still for a moment, breath caught in his chest, thumb hovering over the play button. The night pressed in on the cab, thick and waiting. Click. A faint hiss, then silence. He twisted the volume wheel with his thumb. And then, a voice. Small, software grainy through the years, but still sharp enough to carve into him. My name is Hannah Keller. I'm 7 years old. If you find my bear, please tell Mommy I was good. Please tell her I didn't cry when he told me to be quiet. Ethan's grip tightened on the recorder until his knuckles ached white. He pressed it closer to his ear. The hiss deepened into static. Then came the shuffle of fabric against the microphone. Another voice. Male. Low. Too close to the mic. Muffled but heavy with threat. Half whisper, half growl. Quiet now, little one. You know what happens if you don't. No more, Mommy. A tiny gasp. Then nothing. The tape clicked off. Ethan didn't move. He sat in the silence, the bear back in his lap, the recorder limp in his hand like it had expelled its last breath just to gut him. No more, Mommy. Who could talk to a child like that? He rewound the tape with unsteady fingers, replayed it. Over and over. Each time the words dug deeper. This wasn't Dale's voice. Dale had been soft-spoken, syrupy in tone, always with that slow, neighborly drawl. This was sharper, meaner, a voice that had no patience left for pretending. And in his mind, something clicked into place. A voice from the past bleeding into the present. Uncle Alan says, "We're going on a trip soon." It wasn't a memory so much as a shadow of one. Dread taking the shape of something he'd always known but never wanted to name. Alan Whitmore, Dale's brother, with his an oily smile and the kind of handshake that lingered too long. The man who had bent down to Ethan after their father left, patting his shoulder and telling him, "You're the man of the house now." Ethan's stomach turned. He slammed the recorder down onto the passenger seat so hard the batteries flew free again. He didn't care if it broke. The bear lay slumped beside it, head tilted, glassy eyes catching the dim glow from the dashboard. Birthday gift from Dale. Secret vessel for a recorder. Alan's voice in his sister's final plea. A child's terror soaked into polyester stuffing. He jammed the key into the ignition. The engine growled to life, headlights flooding the empty lot with pale yellow. He picked up his phone. His thumb hovered over his mother's contact. He saw her in his mind, answering the door in her bathrobe, the way her voice would crack if she said Hannah's name out loud. He couldn't do it. Not yet. Not until he was certain. So he drove, not toward home, not toward Alan's old place, sitting 2 towns over like a rot he'd avoided for years. Not yet. He went to the only place that felt like it might hold the answers. The house he grew up in. His mother's house. Hannah's house. By the time he pulled into the driveway, it was nearly 2 in the morning. The porch light flickered once as if it recognized him, then went dark. Inside, the place was quiet, but awake. The hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the faint static from the old TV that his mother left on for company. He took off his boots and crept down the hallway. His old bedroom door was ajar, and he pushed it open to find it half taken over by storage. Cardboard boxes stacked to the ceiling, old coats drooping from hooks, a plastic bin of Hannah's dolls she'd sworn she'd keep forever. Ethan sat on the bed, the mattress dipping under his weight, and lay the bear across his knees. His thumb traced the faded pink stitches. I'm going to find you, kiddo, he whispered, voice low and steady. And if he's still breathing, I'm going to make him choke on what he did. Sleep didn't come. He lay on his back, staring at the ceiling. The bear cradled in the crook of his arm like he was a child again instead of a grown man with scars and a bad shoulder. Every time he closed his eyes, the voice replayed. Quiet now, little one. No more, Mommy. Alan's words coiled under Hannah's softer ones like rot under a coat of paint. He replayed the tape in his mind until every breath, every click, every shuffle of fabric was burned into him. By the time the first gray light of dawn slipped through the blinds, Ethan had decided. He wasn't going to ask permission. He wasn't going to wait. He was going to Alan's. There was no question now. Ethan found his mother in the kitchen, the faint gray of early morning creeping in through the blinds. Her hair was pinned up in a loose twist that had half fallen out, the robe slipping from one shoulder. She stood at the counter, stirring powdered creamer into a chipped mug of coffee. The spoon clinked softly against the ceramic as she hummed a tune under her breath. A soft, wandering melody she probably didn't realize was a lullaby. The kind Hannah used to sing to her bear. She startled slightly when she noticed him standing in the doorway, the bear tucked under his arm. Her gaze landed on it, lingered for the barest second, then snapped away as if it burned her eyes. "Where did you get that?" she asked, voice low and flat. Ethan didn't answer right away. He crossed the room, opened the refrigerator, and grabbed the carton of milk. The sour smell hit him before he even tilted it toward his nose. He tossed it into the trash with a hollow thunk. The sound made her flinch. She tightened her fingers around her mug like it was the last warm thing she could hold on to. "You shouldn't have brought that back here," she murmured. "You know I can't. It's not good for us, Ethan." He set the bear down on the counter between them, turned it over in his hands so his thumb brushed the faded pink embroidery of Hannah's name, the stitching his mother had made all those years ago. "It was in Dale's house," Ethan said. His voice was steady, calm, like he was reciting the weather report. "In a box under his bed." Her throat bobbed as she swallowed. For a moment, it seemed she might speak, but whatever words had risen got stuck there. "That doesn't mean anything," she said finally, her voice brittle. "Dale was good to us. He helped. He gave it to her for her birthday." "Ma!" Ethan's voice cracked, but he forced it back down. "You remember? You stitched her name on it yourself." Her eyes began to shine, but she didn't blink. She didn't reach for the bear. "I don't want to hear it, Ethan. We've done this before. You've done this before, digging in old boxes, pestering old neighbors, chasing ghosts that don't lead anywhere." "This goes somewhere," he said sharply. He pulled the recorder from his pocket and set it down next to the bear, hard enough that it rattled on the formica. Her eyes widened just for an instant. "What is that?" He pressed play. Static filled the small kitchen. Then Hannah's voice. Tiny, fragile, so alive it felt like she was standing between them. "If you find my bear, please tell Mommy I was good." Then the other voice seeps into the space like a shadow. "Quiet now, little one." Alan's voice. Threat curling in every syllable. His mother's hand flew to her mouth. She turned away, pressing her palm flat against the refrigerator door like she needed it to keep herself upright. "You're wrong," she whispered, muffled, almost pleading. "It's her, Ma," Ethan said, voice low, heavy. "And that's Alan's voice behind her." She shook her head. "He's family. He was like family." "Yeah," Ethan said, "like a family." He scooped the recorder up, shoved it back into his pocket. "I'm going to him." "You won't," she said, turning toward him with glassy eyes. "You'll leave it alone. You'll break your own heart again. You'll come home and drink yourself numb like last time." A bitter laugh tore out of him, harsh enough to fracture the stale air dot. "I'm not that kid anymore." He picked up the bear, turned for the door. Her hand shot out and caught his wrist. The grip was bony, cold, the same hand that had once wiped tears from Hannah's cheeks. Ethan, please. If he knows where she is. If she's... Her voice cracked and broke apart. If she's gone, Ethan said steadily, then I want to bury her right. Not in Alan's basement. He pried her hand off gently. She didn't try to stop him again. My term. Alan Whitmore's place sat 20 minutes down the old county roads, past the sagging town line sign and out where the fields bled into patchy woods. The ranch-style house crouched low to the ground, its roof sloping under the weight of years. A rusted camper hunched in the front yard like a grave marker for better days. Ethan parked 2 houses down, killed the engine, and watched through the dirty windshield. The bear sat in the passenger seat, limp but somehow watchful. No lights in the windows. No movement. If Alan were here, Ethan would know soon enough. He stepped out, boots grinding on the gravel. His heartbeat was a hammer in his chest, so loud it felt like it might carry across the yard and pound on the siding. The front porch groaned under his weight, paint peeling in long, curling strips. Wind chimes clattered lazily in the breeze, their song thin and dry. Ethan knocked. Once, twice. No answer. He tried the knob. Locked. He circled to the side of the house. That's when he caught it. The acrid scent of cigarette smoke wafting from a half-open garage door. Beneath it, faint and unmistakable, a muffled cough. Then the scrape of chair legs against concrete. Alan was home. Ethan adjusted his grip on the bear, pushing the door open slowly. The hinges shrieked in protest, loud enough to announce him. Inside, Alan sat at a folding table shoved up against a workbench cluttered with tools. His sleeves were rolled, grease embedded in the creases of his knuckles. A sweating bottle of beer sat in front of him. His pale eyes lifted, locked onto Ethan, and for half a second, there was no surprise there at all. Just a steady, assessing stare, like he'd been expecting this visit. Well, if it ain't the Keller boy, Alan rasped. He lifted the bottle in a mock toast. You look just like your old man. Mean eyes, same chip on your shoulder. Ethan didn't return the smile, didn't move from the doorway. He raised the bear by one paw, letting it dangle like a carcass. Why the hell was this in Dale's house? Something in Alan's expression twitched, quick and small, there and gone. Then his grin widened, all yellow teeth and empty warmth. Now that's a story, he said smoothly, voice sliding like oil over gravel. Why don't you come in, boy? Shut the door. You and me, we got a lot to talk about. The grin stayed wide, but his eyes stayed cold. Ethan didn't budge. His hand tightened, around the bear's side instead of its paw, the rough thread brushing his skin. The cheap fur was damp where his grip dug in. You want to tell me what the hell you think you're doing? Ethan asked, voice flat as a blade. Alan's grin cracked just barely, a hairline fracture in that oily mask. You've got a nasty tone, boy, he said, voice edged like a rusted blade. Your mama teach you to run your mouth at men old enough to bury you? He drained the last of his beer, the bottle tilting in his hand with lazy precision, and set it down on the table as if even that sound needed weighing. Dale was a good man, he said, each word slow, deliberate. A good neighbor. That bear, it was nothing. Just a kid's toy that got mixed up with the old junk. Ethan stepped into the garage, shoulders squared, boots scraping over the oil-stained concrete. She was my sister, he said. She slept with that thing every single night until the day she disappeared. Alan's laugh came low, the kind that didn't reach the eyes. You got a short memory for details, huh? Maybe that little brat wandered off like they all said. Maybe she left the bear behind. Maybe Dale kept it because your mama didn't want it rotting on the sidewalk. Ethan's hand darted to his coat pocket. He pulled out the recorder and slammed it down onto the table so hard the beer bottle rattled in place. Then what the hell is this? His voice was sharp enough to cut. You want to tell me why your voice is on there? Why are you whispering to my sister to keep quiet? For the briefest moment, Alan's eyes flicked to the recorder. a muscle in his jaw twitching before disappearing under the smirk. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, hands folded together like some backroom preacher waiting for a confession. "You got no idea what you're poking at, boy," he said, voice dropping low and mean. "Sometimes kids lie. Sometimes they make up stories. Sometimes they put things where they don't belong." His gaze sharpened. "You think you know my voice after all these years? You think you can prove a damn thing?" Ethan's chest burned, the taste of acid rising in his throat. "I don't have to prove it to you," he said, each word clipped. "I'll prove it to the cops." Alan's laugh this time was full-bellied, a hard, barking sound that echoed off the cinder-block walls. "Oh, the cops. Sure. You think they'll listen after 16 years of your mama knocking on every badge in this county? You think they'll waste time on a dead man's dusty box of crap and some busted toy?" He stood slowly, palms flattening on the table, his eyes locked on Ethan with an unblinking, predatory stillness. "You got no case. Nobody. No proof of a damn thing. All you've got is that bear and a sad little tape from a sad little girl who probably wandered off and froze in a ditch while you were too busy watching cartoons." Ethan's jaw clenched so tight, his teeth clicked together. Hannah's face flickered in his mind, the one from the missing flyer, printed in grainy black and white, folded and refolded until the creases nearly split her smiles in half. He pictured her small fingers brushing the bear's fur, whispering her secrets into its stuffing because it was the only thing she thought could keep her safe. "Where is she?" Ethan's voice was quieter now, stripped of bark but lined with steel. Alan didn't blink. "You think I know? If I did, you think I'd tell you after the stunt Dale pulled?" A sneer curled his lip. "Christ, you think he told me everything? Your sister was long gone by the time I came around to clean up his mess." The way he said clean up made Ethan's skin crawl. "You piece of shit," Ethan said, his knuckles whitening around the bear's limp arm. Alan's smile split sideways into something uglier, showing more yellow than teeth. "Go ahead, boy," he said. He stepped out from behind the table, slow and deliberate, widening his stance. "Hit me. Show me you're your daddy's son. Break my jaw. See if it brings your little sister back." They were close now. Too close. Ethan could smell the stale cigarettes baked into Alan's shirt, the sour edge of beer on his breath. For a heartbeat, his body screamed to swing, to feel bone give way under his fist, to wipe the grin off Alan's face for good. But in the back of his skull, Hannah's voice replayed, clear and small. "Please tell Mommy I was good." He stepped back instead, forcing the air between them. With one slow, deliberate movement, he slid the recorder back into his pocket. Alan's eyes followed it until it vanished. A narrowing of his gaze betrayed him. That tape was something he wanted destroyed. "You can stand there puffing your chest all you want," Alan said, jabbing a nicotine-stained finger toward Ethan's sternum. "But if you go to the cops, you're just going to drag your poor mama through the mud all over again. Make her cry on TV. Dig up that grave she built in her head so she could sleep at night. You want that?" Ethan didn't answer. He brushed past Alan, his shoulder slamming into the man's collarbone hard enough to draw a grunt. He was halfway to the garage door when Alan's voice slithered after him. "You keep knocking like this, boy. You're gonna find out there are worse things than a lost little girl. Walk away while you still can." Ethan stopped in the doorway, his back still to Alan. He adjusted the bear under his arm, thumb grazing the rough stitching of Hannah's name. "You should have burned it, Alan," he said, his voice cold. "You should have burned it all." He stepped out into the pale daylight without looking back. Inside the garage, Alan didn't follow, but Ethan could feel the man's gaze burrowing between his shoulder blades, as if trying to brand him with something that would linger. He didn't know exactly where he'd go next, but he knew he wasn't stopping. The old truck groaned as it carried him away from that squat, rotting house. He barely made it 2 miles down the road before he jerked the wheel toward the shoulder and killed the engine. The cab was quiet except for the ticking of the cooling engine. Ethan sat there, forehead pressed to the steering wheel, the bear wedged between the dash and his ribs like a buffer against the tremor in his hands. Alan's voice crawled through his mind like roaches. "You got no case, nobody, no proof of a damn thing." But Ethan had seen something in Alan's eyes, quick, unguarded, gone in a heartbeat. When he'd said the word cops, it wasn't just recognition. It was fear. A mask slipping just enough for Ethan to see the rot underneath. For all the venom in Alan's voice, one thing rang true. Walking into the police station with a decades-old teddy bear and a scratchy cassette would get him nowhere. They'd smile, maybe even pretend to take notes, but in the end, they'd call his mother. They'd tell her to keep him occupied, to keep him quiet. That meant he needed something else, something heavy enough they couldn't sweep it aside. He reached for the bear on the dashboard, turning it over so the faded embroidery brushed against his thumb. Hannah's name was still there, clinging stubbornly to the matted fur. He flicked open the recorder again and let the tape run. Hannah's voice spilled out, tiny and trembling. "Quiet now, little one. No more, Mommy." This time he listened harder, catching a muted thud behind the words, like something striking wood. He rewound, played it again. The sound was there. A bump, then faintly, almost buried under the static. A low hum. It wasn't Hannah. It wasn't Alan either. The hiss filled the cab until he strained to hear more. A soft click, the drawn-out squeal of a hinge, the sigh of a door moving. It was gone in a heartbeat. He snapped the recorder shut and stared out at the road, his teeth worrying the inside of his cheek until he tasted blood. He kept running the same pieces through his head: Dale, Alan, the bear, the tape. But they refused to lock together. If Hannah had been in Dale's house, why did Alan's voice haunt her last recording? Why keep the bear for 16 years? The questions spun until they struck a buried memory. He was 10, sitting at the kitchen table while his mother whispered into the phone. She was talking to a detective, trying to keep her voice low. But Ethan was listening. "The Whites have that old shed by the back fence. Yes, that's what the neighbor's boy said. Lights back there at night." The police had looked, or so they claimed. "Nothing there, ma'am. Just tools and paint cans." But Ethan remembered Alan always hanging around that shed, hauling tarps off bicycles, stacking boxes into Dale's truck, tossing him candy bars with a wink like they shared some unspoken joke. His grip on the wheel tightened until the tendons in his hands ached. Without thinking, he swung the truck into a hard turn, gravel spitting from the tires. The shed was gone now, torn down when the landlord took over Dale's place. But even if the walls were gone, the ground might still be holding its secrets. By the time he reached the property, the sun was dragging low. The landlord's truck was gone. The place sat in silence. He crossed the backyard, boots sinking into damp leaves and patches of half-frozen mud. The fence leaned under the weight of dead vines, and where the shed had once stood, there was only a square of bare earth littered with crumbling concrete blocks. Ethan crouched and pressed his palms into the cold ground, closing his eyes as Hannah's voice echoed in his head. "Please tell Mommy I was good." He dug with his fingers until his nails split, finding only roots and pebbles. Back at the truck, he grabbed the tire iron and returned, dropping to his knees to pry at the soil like he was unearthing a grave. The first block tipped away under his boot, and beneath it, the dirt was loose, darker. Something metallic glinted back at him through the muck. He worked the tire iron under it until the earth let go. It was a rust-covered lockbox, small enough to carry in one hand. The padlock was long broken, hanging useless from its latch. He forced the lid open, and the smell of damp paper and metal rose up. Inside were yellowed Polaroids, a brittle reel of old tape, and a single pink hair tie with a cheap plastic bead shaped like a star. His breath hitched. Hannah had worn that hair tie on her birthday, the same party where Dale had handed her the bear. He remembered her complaining that it pinched, their mother laughing as she took it out. He sifted through the Polaroids carefully. The images were warped, edges curling with age. One showed a child's small shoulders turned away from the camera, another the corner of a wood-paneled wall, and a dirty blanket pooled on the floor. And in one frame, barely in the corner, was the toe of a boot, scuffed leather, laced in that odd, tight style Alan always bragged came from army training. Ethan closed the box, pressing it against his chest. Alan's story was falling apart. The bear was evidence. The tape was evidence. And now this, the hair tie, the photos, the box buried in the yard, was more than enough to make someone listen. Back at the truck, he set the lockbox on the passenger seat beside the bear. The two sat there like mute witnesses, the faded pink thread and the star-shaped bead staring back at him. The photographs lay across the dash, pale ghosts under the windshield glass. A child's outline, the corner of a blanket, and that boot, Alan's boot, clear as day, as undeniable as a signature scrawled in wet cement. He started the engine, rain-heavy clouds pressing low above him. If Alan thought he'd buried everything, worth knowing, he had made his last mistake. Ethan wasn't a boy anymore, and this time he wasn't walking away. Ethan took out his phone and, one by one, snapped clear photos of each Polaroid. The originals went carefully back into the rust-bitten lockbox, the lid closing with a metallic sigh. The faded hair tie, with its single star-shaped bead, didn't go back. He slid it into the inside pocket of his jacket where it sat against his chest, warming from his body heat. For a fleeting moment, he imagined gunning the truck straight to the police station, dropping the box on some detective's desk, pushing the recorder into their hand, and making them hear Hannah's voice for themselves. But his stomach tightened. He knew what would happen. They'd done it to his mother before. Months of polite promises, saying they were searching every lead, until the calls got shorter, until there was only one final ring from the station telling her they were closing the file. Probably wandered off. Probably an accident. They'd tagged the bear as sentimental clutter, the cassette as inconclusive. Alan would shrug, hands buried in his pockets, smiling that thin, venomous grin, while swearing it was just a memento for his dead brother. If this was going to stick, he needed someone who could make it burn too hot for the department to bury. Only one name came to mind. Ellie Mazur. 16 years ago, she'd been the rookie who took his mother's statement on the porch, the one who quietly handed Ethan a juice box when the uniforms weren't watching. She hadn't stayed long, maybe a year, before transferring. Maybe she got sick of watching cases like his dissolve into dust in the back of a filing cabinet. Now she worked insurance fraud in town. Neat suits, cheap heels. But her name still showed up now and then on local crime shows when a desperate family called her to reopen an old file. It took less than 5 minutes of searching to find her number. He called. 2 rings, then her voicemail. "This is Detective Mazur. Or just Ellie, if you prefer. Leave it." He hung up, called again. 3 rings. Still nothing. He checked the time. Near lunch. If she kept old habits, she'd be at the diner by the courthouse, the one where retired cops lingered over coffee like they were still on the clock. The rain had started to tap against the windshield by the time he started the truck again. The bear's stitched paw brushed against the gear shift when he shoved it into drive. The diner smelled of frying bacon and burnt toast when he walked in. She was easy to spot. Back booth, alone. A half-eaten club sandwich pushed to the side. Her eyes were the same, sharp under the weight of years, hair pulled back tight with a streak of gray now threading through the dark. Recognition flickered over her face, then something harder. "Ethan Keller," she said, voice flat but not unfriendly. "I'll be damned." He slid into the booth opposite her, the lockbox settling on the seat beside him with a heavy thump. Her gaze stayed on his face, not the box. "Still working roofs?" she asked, with a quick half-smile that didn't touch her eyes. "Sometimes," he said. Then he reached into his jacket and set the recorder between them. She didn't touch it, just arched one brow. "This about Hannah?" The name landed like a stone. He nodded once. "Dale Whitmore's dead. I was clearing out his house. Found her bare under his bed. Cut it open. This was inside. Only then did she reach out, fingertips brushing the recorder like it might spark. You've played it? About 100 times. She clicked it on. Hannah's voice bled into the space between them, fragile and tinny. Please tell Mommy I was good. Then the darker voice. Quiet now, little one. No more, Mommy. Ellie's gaze lifted sharply to his. That Alan. Ethan slid the lockbox forward, flipped the lid. She sifted through the contents until her fingers closed on the Polaroid with the boot. Tilting it toward the light, she frowned. I remember that kid's birthday, she said quietly. The clown, the balloons, half the neighborhood there. And I remember those boots. Without asking, she pulled a plastic evidence sleeve from her purse and slid the photo inside. Old habits, she murmured. You know what this is, right? Ethan said, his hands tightening around the table's edge. It's enough to rattle him, she said. Enough to make him sweat. Good. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Then she leaned back, exhaling slowly. I'll dig up the old file. Call in a favor with a judge. If Alan so much as breathes near a warrant, he'll know I'm coming. Her gaze shifted to the bear poking out of Ethan's bag. Don't let that out of your sight. That's your chain, your echo. Lose it, and this dies again. Something in Ethan's chest loosened. Not relief, but the sharp edge of hope cutting through 16 years of decay. Outside, the rain thickened into a steady curtain. Alan probably thought his past was safe. The stitched name on the bear and the voice trapped in that recorder said otherwise. He hadn't meant to sleep, but after Ellie left, the rhythmic patter on the truck's roof pulled him under. The bear sat upright on the passenger seat, a silent sentinel. A knock on the glass dragged him back. For half a second, he thought it was Ellie. It wasn't. Alan's face stared in through the rain-smeared window, pale and sharp. A crooked grin stretched under eyes as cold as ditch water in January. Ethan sat bolt upright, fumbling for the recorder. Alan tapped the window twice, slow and deliberate, the sound muffled by the downpour. Open up, boy, he called through the crack of the glass. Ain't neighborly to sleep on the street. Ethan stayed still, hands away from the locks. Engine silent. The rain beat harder, blurring the edges of Alan's smile, but not the threat in his eyes. Ethan didn't trust himself to open that window more than a couple of inches. Alan leaned down until his breath fogged the glass, voice sliding through the crack like grease on water. I think we need to talk, he said. Rain pattered onto the seat as Ethan stared straight ahead, jaw locked. The bear sat between them, Hannah's name faint but still legible under the smear of condensation. Alan's gaze flicked to it, then back to Ethan's face. You're making trouble, he murmured. Ellie Mazur, still playing savior for the lost causes? Cute. You should have burned it all, Ethan said quietly. You left pieces. That's your problem. The corner of Alan's grin twitched. Not all teeth now. Something meaner and more animal flashed in his eyes. Listen to me, he hissed. That woman's not going to save you. She couldn't find her way out of a hallway back then. What's she going to do now? Parade your mama's tears on the evening news? Say her name one more time, Ethan warned. Alan ignored it, leaning in so close the rain between them was almost warm. You think you're going to find that sweet little girl under some floorboards? Have you ever stopped to think maybe she didn't want to be found? Ethan's grip on the wheel went white. Alan's whisper sharpened. You keep digging, you'll put your mama in the ground right beside her. The window shot up so fast Alan jerked back, knuckles rapping hard on the glass. His grin was gone, replaced by a flat bearing of teeth. He tapped a finger once, twice, 3 times on the window, then turned and walked off into the drizzle. No coat, just a clinging flannel on his hunched shoulders. Ethan's pulse thundered. He slammed the truck into gear, but not toward home, not toward Ellie. The road unwound out of town, past the diner, past the safe places. 2 exits later, he turned onto a back road, the kind used only by hunters and men with reasons to stay unseen. The track into Alan's property was little more than a break in the trees. Twin ruts cut through the mud, branches clawing at the truck's sides. He killed the lights, creeping forward until the shack materialized from the dark. A sagging box of plywood and tin, half swallowed by the forest. The rain had stopped, but the silence left behind felt worse, like the woods were holding their breath. Ethan got out with the bear under his arm, the recorder heavy in his pocket. No gun, no plan, just a promise looping in his head. "Please tell Mommy I was good." The porch groaned under his weight. The door dangled from a single hinge, and the air that breathed out of the darkness stank of mold and old rot. His phone light cut a thin blade through the gloom. Beer cans, folded tarps, a cot with its frame snapped. He moved slowly. In the far corner, under a rug stained to the color of old tea, the floor sagged. He pulled the rug back, revealing the outline of a trap door. His pulse pounded as he pried up the warped wood. A breath of damp earth hit him. Below lay a crawl space, beams dark with age, nails corroded to brown thorns. The beam of his light struck something in the dirt. A bracelet, cheap plastic beads spelling Hannah. He reached down, digging through the muck until the beads lay cold and slick in his palm. They were the kind you'd buy from a dollar rack, bright and useless. He'd seen them before, in Hannah's hair the day she turned 7. A floorboard creaked behind him. He froze. The shuffle of fabric, then the unmistakable press of cold metal against the base of his skull. Alan's voice came soft, deliberate, and close enough that the sour heat of whiskey laced his breath. "Should have left it alone, boy." Ethan didn't move. The steel at his neck bit through skin and muscle, the kind of chill that sinks into bone. Alan's whisper crawled against his ear. "Think you're some kind of hero? Digging through dirt that doesn't belong to you, dragging out things you'll wish you hadn't seen." Ethan's fingers tightened around the bracelet, beads biting into his palm. The bear lay just inside the doorway where he'd dropped it, one stitched paw catching the edge of his phone light. The recorder was still in his pocket, a small weight that felt like a loaded secret. "You don't know how deep this goes," Alan rasped. "You think Dale was a monster working alone? That I came in after to clean his mess? That girl, your sweet Hannah, she was mine before he ruined it with his soft streak." Ethan's stomach churned, rage coiling in his chest. Alan's lips almost brushed his ear. "You know how easy it is to keep a kid quiet, right words, right fear, a basement and a locked door." Ethan clenched his jaw until pain shot into his temples. His free hand began to slide toward his pocket, inch by inch. The recorder was still in his pocket, Hannah's voice and Alan's confession buried inside. Ethan's thumb had just brushed the switch when Alan caught the movement. The barrel smashed into Ethan's shoulder, pain bursting white behind his eyes. "Don't you move, boy!" Alan's growl was low and ragged, his breath sour with whiskey. Somewhere in the black belly of the crawl space, water dripped in a slow, steady rhythm that seemed to sync with Ethan's pulse hammering in his throat. Alan leaned in until his words were warm against Ethan's ear. "She's alive, you know." Ethan froze, breath hitching. The man chuckled, a wet, hollow sound that scraped the air. "Didn't think we'd keep her, did you? But she was easy. Soft little thing like that. She'd sit quiet as a church mouse once you convinced her mommy was dead, and the world outside would chew her up." "Alive." The word burned through Ethan's skull, rooting in his chest like a brand. The bracelet dug into his palm, the plastic letters cutting deep. He turned, his head just enough to growl. "Where is she?" His voice sounded strange to his own ears, rough and rusted. Alan stepped back half an inch, the distance more taunt than retreat. His grin gleamed faintly in the dark. "Close. She knows better than to run, knows better than to scream. Little Hannah's got herself a new name now. New mind, too. Bent just right." Ethan's fingers found the recorder's switch and clicked it. The faint hiss of static filled his pocket, unheard over Alan's gloating. "You want her back? You're going to drag her home to that broken woman you call a mother?" Alan's tone turned mocking. She won't know you. She'll spit in your face before she calls you brother." The words didn't weaken Ethan. They sharpened him. He sucked in a breath, then drove the back of his skull into Alan's nose. Bone crunched. Alan's snarl turned wet as the gun tumbled into the dirt. Ethan spun and smashed his fist into Alan's gut. The older man doubled, knocking the broken cot against the wall. Ethan lunged for the gun, but Alan hit him from the side, dragging them both down in a tangle of limbs. Dirt flew up around them, clinging to sweat and blood. Alan's fingers clawed at Ethan's throat, nails ripping skin. The recorder was wedged between them, Hannah's voice muffled but there. "Please tell Mommy I was good." Ethan roared and drove his elbow into Alan's ribs until something gave. The man wheezed and loosened his grip. The bracelet slipped from Ethan's hand and skittered away into the shadows. Alan's eyes snapped toward it, that flicker of fear, real and raw, slicing through his rage. "Where is she?" Ethan spat, blood and spit mixing on his tongue. "Close," Alan hissed through broken teeth. "Close enough to kiss goodnight." Ethan's fist came down twice into Alan's jaw, each hit dulling the man's fight until he went slack on the dirt. Ethan pushed himself upright, lungs tearing for air. The smell of wet earth pulled his gaze deeper into the crawl space. He dropped to his knees and slid inside, phone light jerking over warped beams and brick crusted with mold. At the far end stood a small, rotting door, its rusty latch hanging crooked. His hands shook as he lifted the bar. The hinges groaned in protest. Inside, a girl sat curled on a bare mattress, knees drawn to her chest. Her hair was a tangled curtain, skin pale, eyes wide but emptied out. Hannah. The name was barely a whisper, but it still hurt to say. Her expression didn't change. No recognition. The recorder in his pocket hissed again, that small ghost of a voice repeating its plea. Her gaze drifted to the bear clutched in Ethan's other hand, the stitched paw, the faded name. She blinked. Once, twice. Ethan knelt, holding it out. "It's me. It's Ethan. You know this bear." She didn't answer, but her fingers trembled toward the worn fur. Outside, the wind stirred the trees. Rain ticked on the tin roof again. Ethan pressed the bear into her hands. "Come on, Hannah," he whispered, voice breaking. "Let's go home." Her grip tightened around the bear's neck like she feared it would vanish. She didn't speak, didn't flinch when thunder cracked overhead, just stared at the frayed ear, tracing the faded threads of her name. "You're real," Ethan murmured. "I'm here now. You hear me?" Her lips parted, breath shallow, but her eyes flicked past him to the crawlspace door, then back to the bear. The way a child checks the closet before bed, knowing the real danger isn't inside the room at all. That old guilt clawed up his throat. 9 years old, cereal bowl in his lap, cartoons on the TV, the soft creak of the front door opening behind him. He forced it down. A creak from above yanked his head up. Slow, dragging footsteps crossed the rotting boards overhead. Alan, still moving, still coming. Ethan turned back toward Hannah. Her gaze was still fixed on the worn teddy bear, the only tether left in a mind that Alan and Dale had spent 16 years grinding into dust. "Hey, look at me, kiddo." Her eyes lifted slightly, pale and empty. But there was a faint flicker there. "You remember this, don't you?" He tapped the paw, where faded pink stitches spelled her name. "Your birthday. Mom sewed that herself. You held it so tight she had to pry it from your hands just to wash it." She didn't answer, but her thumb moved over the threads. Slow, back and forth, back and forth. From somewhere above, a floorboard groaned. Closer this time. Ethan slid his hand into his pocket, brushing the cracked edge of the recorder. Click. Static filled the stale air, and then that tiny voice, trapped for years inside cheap plastic. "Please tell Mommy I was good." Hannah's breath hitched, barely a sound, but her eyes rose to meet his. A spark, a fracture in the wall Alan had built around her. He leaned closer. The hiss returned, and then Alan's voice bled through, low and threatening. "Quiet now, little one." Her shoulders flinched. One hand started toward her ears, then froze, trembling midair. Above them, heavy boots crossed the floor toward the hatch. Ethan shut off the recorder and caught her wrist, gentle but unyielding. "You with me? We're leaving." She didn't fight, didn't nod, just let him pull her up from the filthy mattress, the bear clutched against her chest like armor. They crawled through the low dirt tunnel, wood beams scraping his back, her breathing shallow and silent behind him. No crying, no panic, just that dead quiet he hated more than any scream. He pushed her up through the hatch first. Her legs shook, bare feet meeting the cold, littered floorboards. He followed, only to see Alan's shadow fill the shack's doorway, shotgun crooked in his hands, nose still bent from where Ethan had broken it. "Well," Alan rasped, voice ragged but steady, "look at this happy family reunion." He stepped inside, muzzle low, relaxed, like a man who'd done this before and could wait all night. "Get away from her," Ethan growled, moving Hannah behind him, one arm out, the recorder pressing against his back pocket like a hidden blade. Alan gave a short, humorless laugh that seemed to make the walls shrink. "So you can take her back to that sad little house? To that useless woman you call a mother? She won't even know you, boy. She won't even know herself." Ethan shifted his stance. Hannah's breath fluttered against his spine. Her fingers gripped the back of his shirt, clutching through cotton and into skin. Alan lifted the shotgun, sighting center mass. "You think she wants this? She's safe here. Mine, not yours, not your mama's, mine." He stepped forward, the barrel hovering over Hannah's shoulder. "You gonna shoot me?" Ethan snarled. "Do it, you sick old bastard, but she's coming with me!" A thin smile cracked across Alan's battered face. "No, boy, she's not." The barrel flicked upward. Ethan lunged. The shotgun thundered in the small shack, deafening, the blast shredding the wall inches from Ethan's head. Splinters rained down as Ethan slammed his shoulder into Alan's gut, driving him into the rotted frame. Alan gasped. The shotgun clattered to the floor, spinning under a collapsed cot. They hit the ground together, fists, elbows, years of hate given flesh. Alan's knuckles split skin at Ethan's temple. Blood filled Ethan's mouth. He spat it back in Alan's face. Behind them, Hannah stood frozen, bare pressed to her chest, the recorder half visible in Ethan's dropped jacket. Alan's hands clawed for Ethan's throat. "She's mine!" he hissed, spit flying. Ethan drove his forehead into Alan's nose again. Cartilage cracked, grip loosening. "Not anymore," Ethan snarled, shoving him away and scrambling for the shotgun. But Hannah reached something else first. She let the bear drop, snatched the recorder, and hit play. Her younger voice spilled into the air. "Please tell Mommy I was good." Alan froze, his eyes cutting toward her for just a second. Enough. Ethan seized the shotgun and slammed the stock into Alan's jaw. The man crumpled like wet laundry, sprawled on the rotting floor. Hannah stood there barefoot, a forgotten toy on the ground, clutching the recorder to her chest like it was the only thing keeping her afloat. Her lips moved without sound, but he read the word, Ethan. He rose unsteadily, chest burning, and reached for her. Her cold fingers closed around his wrist. "Come on, kiddo," he murmured. "We're going home." They stumbled out as the rain faded, dawn bruising the horizon. Every heartbeat sent a throb through Ethan's shoulder where the shotgun's stock had clipped him. Hannah's small hand stayed wrapped around his, as if letting go might drag her back into the dark. She hadn't spoken. Not really. Only that faint whisper of his name when the recorder's ghost voice had cracked through the haze Alan left in her head. But it was enough. At the truck, he lifted her into the passenger seat. She hugged the recorder tight enough to drain her knuckles of color. The bear was back in her lap, frayed ear pressed to her chest like a pulse. He slammed the door, rounded to the driver's side, and fired the engine. The headlights washed over the shack's door frame, revealing Alan's hunched silhouette propped against it. His head hung low, spit trailing from a ruined mouthful of teeth. Ethan looked at him through the drizzle for half a second, then pulled away. Alan's head lifted slowly, dazed and bloodied, but his eyes still burned with something stubborn and sour, an old poison too deep to ever scrub clean. Ethan didn't offer him the satisfaction of words, no parting insult, no promise of vengeance. He just turned the key, and the truck's engine roared to life. The tires spat mud and gravel like the land itself wanted to get rid of this place. In the rearview mirror, the shack shrank into the wet dark, swallowed by trees and shadows, until it was nothing more than a smear of rotting wood in the brush. A question mark that would never get a full answer. 2 hours later, the county sheriff's office looked exactly as it had 16 years ago. The same cracked cement steps. The same sagging notice in the window about "Respect our lawmen." The same flicker in the overhead light above the entrance. Only this time, the child clutching the bear wasn't a scared 7-year-old. She was 23, pale as chalk, knees pulled tight to her chest in the back of a deputy's cruiser, staring at the pink stitches on the bear's paw, like it was the only thing keeping her from slipping under again. Ellie Mazer was already waiting in the parking lot, rain dripping from the end of her ponytail. She took one look at Ethan's battered face and seemed to understand everything without asking. Then she looked into the cruiser and saw Hannah, saw the wide, empty eyes, the recorder clutched tight in both hands, and her own breath hitched. "You did it," she whispered, voice trembling despite the steel in it. "God damn, Keller, you actually did it." For the first time all night, Ethan's knees wavered. He braced a hand against the truck's hood just to keep himself upright. "He's still breathing," he rasped. "Old shack on Birch Hollow, crawl space. You'll find him there." Ellie's nod was sharp, decisive, the kind of nod that promised action. Her voice shifted, that soft edge replaced with the same cold authority he remembered from the night she'd first stood on his porch as a rookie. "I'll bury him," she said. "Count on it." They moved Hannah inside quickly. The bear and recorder were sealed into evidence bags, but kept close enough for her to see, as if even a few feet of distance might make them vanish. Ellie stayed near her, speaking low and steady, dropping small reassurances into the spaces between questions. Ethan trailed after them, shoulder throbbing, knuckles raw. The antiseptic sting of the station hit him in the gut. Too many memories in the tile floors and buzzing lights. In a small, windowless interview room, Hannah sat in a metal chair, the bear balanced in her lap. A female deputy asked questions so gently it was almost a lullaby, but Hannah didn't answer. A blink here, a shallow nod there. Nothing more. Then Ellie slipped inside, clipboard under one arm. She gave Ethan a brief look. "You good to sit with her?" He nodded and lowered himself into the seat beside Hannah. The chair's legs scraped faintly across the floor, the sound loud in the quiet. Ellie set the recorder on the table and slid it toward Hannah's restless hands. "You know who that is?" Ellie asked softly. Hannah's lashes fluttered, and the bear's frayed ear brushed her chin. After a long pause, she gave the smallest nod. Her lips moved, soundless at first, and then came a rasp of a word, rough as if it had scraped up her throat from years of silence. "Me." Ethan's breath caught. "That's right," he said, voice unsteady. "You were always good, Han. You hear me? Always." For 2 seconds, 2 whole seconds, her gaze met his without that glassy distance. It was the same look she used to give him before kindergarten, when she'd hand him her shoes so he could tie them. Then the moment passed, her eyes sliding back to the bear. But there was a crack now. Something in the wall Alan had built had shifted. Ellie's hand came down on Ethan's shoulder, warm and firm, grounding him. "You'll have to say it again," she murmured. "Over and over. It'll take time." "I've got time," he answered, low and certain. Ellie left to handle the storm outside the room. The hallway beyond hummed with radio chatter, Confirmation that Alan had been found where Ethan left him, cuffed and hauled in. The charges stacked against him sounded like a burial in progress. A deputy stepped in, setting a bottle of water on the table. But Ethan didn't touch it. Hannah didn't even glance up. Her thumb kept tracing the stitched letters on the bear's paw, like she was reading a prayer only she could understand. Time blurred. The hum of the fluorescent lights, the faint clack of a keyboard somewhere down the hall. It all dissolved into the slow ticking of the wall clock. Then, a quiet knock. The door opened just enough for someone to slip in. It was their mother. Her hair was messy, pulled into a half-hearted knot, and her coat hung over a nightgown. She must have grabbed it in a blind rush when Ellie's call came through. She froze in the doorway, breath catching in her throat as her eyes landed on the figure in the chair. Hannah looked up. Her expression didn't change at first. Still that dull, empty stare. But then something shifted. One word, barely louder than a breath, slipped out. "Mommy!" It wasn't much, but it was the same word she'd whispered through a mouthful of stuffing and cheap fur when she was small. Ethan felt something break inside, and for once, the breaking felt right. He didn't wipe his tears away. He just set his palm on Hannah's shoulder. She leaned into it, just an inch, but enough. Enough to feel her step back from the edge. Outside, in the evidence room, a deputy was logging the recorder into the system. But the bear stayed with Hannah. It would always stay with her. One name, stitched in faded pink thread, was all it took to bring her home.